Here's written by Stan Lee, comic scholar and historian Peter Sanderson talks about Stan's inimitable writing style. And I just happen to have Peter Sanderson right here to talk about Stan's inimitable writing style. Peter, this was one of the panels you picked to talk about. So tell us about, can anybody imitate that style?
I think lots of people have tried to imitate that style, but only Stan can really pull it off. It's, this goes back to several years ago, right here at MoCCA, when Ken Wong was here in the audience, and I co-curated a show covering a retrospective of Stan's career. And this is one of the pieces of artwork that we got. And when I was working on the wall text for that show, I started thinking about Stan's scripting style. Now, Stan as writer, there's long been a lot of controversy about it because of the Marvel style that Stan developed, whereby instead of doing a full script first for the comic book story, he had, as you've seen earlier, Stan and the artist would have a plot conference, and the artist would have a lot of leeway to add things to the plot. In fact, in that Corben story about their plot conferences, that's sort of a comedy story from the back of the Daredevil annual, and it goes sort of like Stan stay. And then Daredevil fights Baron Zemo, and Conan says, but Baron Zemo's dead, how do we bring him back? You figure that out. And they end up fighting on the top of the volcano, and all of a sudden it explodes. Well, how do we get Daredevil off the volcano? You'll figure that out. And so there's been attacks over the years that Stan really didn't have all that much to do with the plotting, and he was just scripting it. Well, I think he was co-plotting the stories, but I was starting to get interested in what, if you just look at the script, the dialogue, the captions that he added after the artwork he's done, what does that say about what he brought to those stories? Could you go back?
Sure.
Now this page from an early issue of Daredevil, with one of John Romita's earliest, it's a nice page, it's a handsome page, but it's a very quiet page. And Stan obviously wanted to get the story starting off with a bang, more than this quiet, peaceful, serene page of Daredevil just sort of floating through the air.
The guy just sitting over the city on a line, that's it.
Yeah. So what he does is, the caption up here, it goes, a swirling, streaking, swashbuckling figure swings above the spires of New York, and our pulse-pounding saga begins. Well, pulse-pounding saga is sort of cliche, but I rather like the rest because with this alliterative style, which sometimes comes off as self-parodic, but here I think it comes off as sort of poetic. He conveys the idea of this action, the swirling, the streaking through the sky. He gives you more sense of movement than you get from the actual picture. And the swashbuckling phrase keys you to his concept of Daredevil, which is very different from the Daredevil that we know of today, the Frank Miller and Daredevil on, the grim devil on out fighting for justice. Stan's character is a daredevil. He's a swashbuckler. He's Errol Flynn in a costume. And when you get to this word balloon, a pretty big word balloon by today's standards, but it's a little soliloquy. Now, soliloquies, captions, narration, these are all fallen from favor in today's comics. But what Stan has Daredevil saying here is, how I've longed for this marvelous moment to be back in action again, free as a falcon, with the world at my feet. This is where I belong. This is my food, my drink, my life. This is why Daredevil was born. And it's, again, it's sort of a little more poetic than you really think of Stan being generally, but it's very evocative. It gives you a sense of what Stan thinks it would be like to be Daredevil, to be this kind of superhero, to be able to swing free as a falcon, free as a bird, through the skies, how much he enjoys it, how it's actually fulfilling an inner need, that this is what he really wants to be, not the lawyer in the business suit. He wants to be this guy. And this is my food, my drink, my life. This is why Daredevil was born. It gives you a sense of the joy of the superhero medium. It becomes a statement about who Daredevil is. All this on what is otherwise, without those balloons and captions, a pleasant but undistinguished silent page.
I think another thing that it does is in an era when, like, a kid would go to the newsstand and pick up a comic, here's the first page. Oh, I'm reading it. Oh, I'm reading it. Oh, I'm committed now. I mean, it's got enough text that you feel like an obligation, to stay with it and buy it. just like Rebot's cover copy. So Peter,
Atlanta calls that the hook.
Yeah.
The hook. Yeah, give them a reason on page 1 to read page 2.
And to pay for all 22 pages. Peter, I'm sneaking one in here. This is one you haven't seen before. And, but you're probably familiar with it. It's from Tales of Asgard, which there's the character Volstagg that is very similar to Orson Welles, I think. And, Orson Welles is Falstaff.
Well, to Shakespeare's Falstaff.
And there you go.
Because Volstagg would have come up.
I thought it was not done.
No, Volstagg would have appeared before Chimes of Midnight came out, which was Welles's Falstaff film. But he sort of looks.
I should have known better than to.
Yeah. No, this wasn't one of the. This wasn't one of the pages in the show, or one that I
No, it's not.
wrote about in the article. But it does show that I think that Stan was an admirer of Shakespeare, and even though you could not possibly argue that Stan was writing on Shakespeare's level, he took lessons from Shakespeare. For example, not just an homage like Volstagg as basically a version of Falstaff, the warrior who's actually a coward, but is funny. But also the fact that Stan, today, dialogue in comics tends to be as realistic, as naturalistic as possible. But Stan, like Shakespeare, had different levels of dialogue. There would be characters like Thor and the Asgardians who would speak in this very elevated style, or like villains like Dr. Doom. I mentioned in the article, the first Dr. Doom story I ever saw, he accused the thing of being a blot on the escutcheon of humanity, and I was very impressed. At the same time, you've got characters like the Thing, who are sort of like the comedy characters in Shakespeare, who speak in prose and tell low comedy jokes. And so you can, even on that previous page where you have that title, and men shall call him Ox, which is way over the top, but I can see what Stan is trying to do, because at the same time he's trying to bring his characters down to earth, to get you to identify with Daredevil, what he feels like to be a superhero. At the same time, Stan is trying to give you the sense of grandeur, this is indeed modern mythology. So let's put in these sort of Shakespearean or biblical cadences, and men shall call him Ox, as if it's the King James Bible.
He freed himself from the chains of the stuff of the 50s, where the writers were afraid to write anything that was not a 10-word declarative sentence, lest some school teacher in Missouri would think that these comics were corrupting the language for the kids. I don't know how he got away with that.
Because he was the editor as well as the writer. So.
Yeah, but I mean, there was, that evil stuff out in the zeitgeist. Maybe the same way Julie Schwartz got away with doing continued stories. He said, "I didn't ask."
But I think that what I've discovered with looking at Stan's scripting is that he would use the scripting in many different ways. It would pump up the sense of drama and action and vitality in the script. There's all this humor. Whenever he got too pretentious, he'd undercut it with jokes. He would reach out to the reader. He would address the reader directly. He would pull him into the story. He would, you got the sense that of Stan, the storyteller, of a person, not just an anonymous narrator, a voice of God, but Stan, the person who's sitting you down and telling you this story and practically talking to you directly. And when we talked about how he was using a vocabulary that was beyond the level of a 10-year-old, right now I'm researching this essay I'm doing for a critical book on Daredevil, and I was going through a lot of Stan's Daredevil stories, and there was one story that I came across where it's a page with a caption that starts out, well, when most of you commute to work, you probably go by car, or you go by train, or you go by bus, but if you're a swinging superhero like Daredevil, this is the way you travel. And Gene Colan is drawing this wonderful picture of Daredevil leapfrogging over one of the line statues in front of the New York Public Library. And I thought, well, this is another great opening, another great book where he's giving you the sense of what fun it must be to be Daredevil pre-Frank Miller. And it's, but also when I thought about it a second time, I realized, wait a minute. This is the 60s when most people think of the comic book audience as little kids, and how is Stan addressing you? Well, when you're commuting to work, Stan is recognizing that he's getting older readers, because by this point he's probably already being invited to speak at colleges and so forth. And you know, Rolling Stone interviewers around this time, I guess. But also, it's sort of like a signal to the kids who are reading this. This isn't the juvenile comics you are used to. You're reading stuff that's good enough for adults.
And he's stopping just short of self-parody that you mentioned. As an enormously sophisticated 23-year-old journalist picking that stuff up, that kind of gave me permission to read it. Because he was winking at me. And that kind of freed me up to enjoy the stories, which is what I think I was really doing. But if he wasn't taking it seriously, then it's okay for me to enjoy it. Stan has one of the great right-brain minds of all time. And how he came up with that, he probably doesn't know. But it's near genius.
And then
another thing that's...
Peter, go ahead.
Well, just one more thing. I think that another thing about that's very sophisticated for what Stan was doing at that time is that at the same time in the narration that he's describing Daredevil and what's going on as if they're real, as if they're real people, he's also in the narration admitting that it's a story. He's saying, let's look at this great picture that Gene Colan just drew. There's another Daredevil issue I found where it opens with 2 splash pages, 2 full page. The first page is a full panel, the second page is a full panel. On the second page, Stan has a caption saying, couldn't decide which one of these pages to watch. So I decided to give both of them because Gene did such a great job. And it's like for a little, and again, this is pretty sophisticated for a medium that's considered for kids because he wants you to follow it on 2 levels. He wants you to believe that it's real, suspend your disbelief, but at the same time, he's saying, this is a story, I'm showing you how the decisions that go into making it work.
And then that same voice continues over into the bullpen bulletins where Stan did directly talk to you, and David Kasikov, who's here in the second row, wrote an article about the evolution of Stan's voice. David, of all the things you could have written about, I think I just said to you, you want to write something? How did you pick that topic?
Well, I wasn't going to read through all the Daredevils. I found, as I say in the article, that when I came to comics and I started to read Marvel Comics, I think I was 10 or 11, I really loved the bulletin pages, and I loved to read them. I would say that was the first thing I went to read. And it goes, Peter, to what you were saying, that he developed a fantastic voice, a way of speaking to the reader that grabbed you. And I still find when I read his stuff today, it's entertaining. He has a great voice. And other than Denny, really, I don't think any other writers from that era can you really continue enjoying reading. So that's why I just thought it was such a act of genius for Stan to do that, and it just works so well.
Well, it's a great article, and it's in the book.